So picture this. It's 1946. You have a room full of hardened Italian judges, police officers, and these seasoned forensic doctors. And they're all just standing around a cold metal table in a local morgue.
Right, a highly clinical, very serious setting.
Exactly. But what they're watching is a tiny, like 4'11", middle-aged woman in a dark dress, and she's walking up to a fresh human cadaver.
Which is already bizarre.
Yeah. And they had her a set of butcher knives and a heavy bone saw.
Just handing it to her.
Right. And then they just watch in absolute stunned silence. Because this woman systematically, flawlessly dismembers the body into exactly 9 pieces.
Wow.
And she does it in under 12 minutes.
12 minutes. I mean, it is a moment that feels entirely fictional. It's like something pulled straight out of, a gothic horror novel or some grim fairy tale.
It really does.
But it's a matter of absolute historical and legal record. It's this moment that forced the authorities to realize that the monsters we fear aren't always lurking in the shadows. Like sometimes they're literally baking pastries in the kitchen next door.
Yeah, which brings us to why we are here today. Welcome to the deep dive. For you sitting there listening, the mission today is to really peel back the layers of a dark Italian folk horror legend that turned out to be horribly, incredibly true.
Yeah, it's a heavy one.
It really is. We are stepping into a domestic landscape that is going to severely challenge your perception of safety. So we are looking at the case of Leonarda Cianciulli.
Infamous in the annals of history as the soap maker of Correggio.
The soap maker of Correggio. And to do this, we're pulling from this eclectic, frankly macabre stack of source materials.
Very dark stack.
Yeah, we have a 1952 Australian newspaper article from Truth Sydney. We have modern criminological and psychiatric academic papers. Specifically, there's this really dense 2018 report from Psychiatry and Behavioral Science.
Which is excellent, by the way. Very thorough analysis.
Absolutely. And we're also looking at historical museum records, plus transcripts from historical deep dives that have covered our life.
It is a disturbing stack of material, honestly. It requires us to look at the absolute extremes of human behavior.
For sure. So imagine this. Just picture the small, quiet town of Correggio, Italy in 1939. You have this respected, popular woman running a small soap and clothing shop.
A total pillar of her community.
Right. She's the kind of neighbor you go to for a cup of coffee, maybe some matchmaking advice, or just, a sympathetic ear. Okay, let's unpack this because this well-loved, gentle mother figure was secretly hacking up her friends.
Yeah.
She was boiling them in chemical vats and baking their blood into crunchy tea cakes.
I know, it sounds completely absurd. But what's fascinating here is how this specific case forces us to look at the intersection of extreme pathological maternal instinct, deeply entrenched archaic superstition, and the overarching socio-political stress of wartime panic.
It's just a massive collision of factors.
Exactly. It is a perfect, terrifying storm that completely fractured a human mind.
But I mean, if she's this broken, how does she function in society? Like, how does a beloved local shopkeeper become a literal butcher?
Right, because you don't just wake up on a Tuesday and decide to dissolve your friends in caustic soda.
No. You really don't. Before we can even begin to understand the visceral, frankly disgusting mechanics of what she did, we have to look at the deeply tragic mind that led her there.
Absolutely. The psychological foundation for this kind of extreme anomalous violence is almost always laid decades earlier. You have to trace it back to the origin point.
Which, in Leonarda's case, is her birth in Montella, Italy in 1894. And her early life was it was bleak.
Incredibly bleak.
Yeah, she was born Leonarda Vincenza Giuseppa Cianciulli, the youngest of 6 children. And according to the historical records and her own highly controversial memoir, her mother, Serafina, had essentially been forced into her marriage after being kidnapped and assaulted.
Which is horrific on its own.
Terribly. Now, there are conflicting accounts about whether Leonarda was the direct product of that assault or a later union. But the psychological reality for Leonarda was the same. She felt entirely, comprehensively rejected.
She felt like a burden.
Literally. She wrote that she was a weak child and that her parents treated her like a weight.
And that perceived or real parental rejection is the bedrock of her later pathology. When we look at that 2018 criminological analysis we mentioned, that severe lack of maternal affection is totally foundational.
How does that manifest, though?
Well, children who experience that level of emotional abandonment early on often develop an insecure attachment style. They don't have a safe harbor. So in Leonarda, this manifested in extreme emotional instability and a very dark, obsessive preoccupation with mortality.
And we aren't just talking about, a teenager writing morbid poetry. As a young girl, she attempted suicide twice, and the methods she chose, they are so violently visceral.
Yeah, they really are.
Once she tried to swallow the rigid metal stays of a corset,
Right.
and another time she actually ate shards of broken glass. I mean, what does that even do to a human body?
It's devastating. It shreds the esophagus and the intestinal tract. It causes massive internal hemorrhaging.
God, just the thought of chewing glass.
I know. Choosing methods that cause severe internal lacerations rather than, say, a painless overdose, it shows a profoundly disturbed mental state. It's not a cry for help. It is an act of violent self-annihilation.
Like she was punishing herself.
Exactly. She was internalizing all the rejection she felt from her mother and turning it into physical destruction of her own body.
But she survives the glass. She survives her childhood. And in 1917, at the age of 23, she decides to marry a registry office clerk named Raphael Pansardi.
Which was a massive point of contention.
Huge. This was in direct defiance of her family. Her parents had picked out a cousin for her to marry, which was very standard for rural Italy at the time. But she refuses. She chooses Raphael.
And her mother did not take that well.
Not at all. Her mother was so enraged by this rebellion that on the eve of the wedding, she supposedly cursed Leonarda.
We really need to pause here and understand the psychological weight of a mother's curse in rural, early 20th century Italy.
Because it's not just like getting yelled at.
No, this wasn't a family argument where someone yells, "I never want to see you again." In that specific cultural and temporal context, a mother's curse was widely believed to be a literal supernatural hex.
Like real magic.
Yes, it was folk magic. It was the malachio, the evil eye, weaponized by the person who gave you life.
So she genuinely believed she was walking around with a supernatural target on her back.
Yes, she did. For Leonarda, this curse became the central pillar of her entire delusional framework. It gave her a cognitive anchor.
A way to explain everything bad that happened.
Exactly. Whenever anything tragic happened to her, and as we'll see, an immense amount of tragedy was coming, she had a preordained explanation. My mother cursed me.
Right.
It shifted the locus of control entirely outside of herself. She wasn't unlucky. She was hunted by malevolent forces.
And the tragedy did come. Relentlessly. She and Raphael lived this chaotic, nomadic life. They were incredibly poor. They moved from Lauria to Lacedonia.
It was a very unstable environment.
Yeah, their home was even completely destroyed by the massed 1930 Irpinia earthquake, leaving them with absolutely nothing. And somewhere in there, in 1927, she actually went to prison for fraud.
The fraud conviction is a very critical data point for the psychiatrists who evaluated her later.
Why is that? Does it show she wasn't just completely delusional?
Precisely. It establishes a behavioral precedent. It proves she possessed executive function and was highly capable of deception. She knew how to create a false reality to manipulate others for her own gain.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that kind of calculated grifting requires a level of predatory intelligence that complicates the pure insanity defense later on. But her ultimate trigger wasn't financial desperation. It was biological trauma.
Right, the pregnancies. This is the part of the source material that is just heartbreaking to read. Over the course of her marriage, Leonarda was pregnant 17 times.
17 times.
17. Imagine the physical toll on a woman's body in the 1920s, living in poverty without modern medical care. And out of those 17 pregnancies, 3 ended in miscarriages. And 10 of her children died in their infancy or youth. She buried 10 children. Only 4 survived.
It's an almost unimaginable scale of grief. The biological devastation alone is staggering. But the emotional trauma of burying baby after baby, child after child, it completely fractured her reality.
I can't even imagine surviving that mentally.
Modern profilers looking at this case point out that this immense cycle of loss caused a pathological, hyperprotective fixation on her 4 surviving children. Her entire identity became consumed by the desperate need to keep them alive.
Keep them alive against a universe she thought was literally attacking her.
Yes, against a universe she genuinely believed was trying to systematically eradicate her bloodline.
Because of the mother's curse. Every tiny coffin was just proof that the curse was real.
That's the tragedy of it. The curse provided the why. And this paranoia was constantly being fed by her environment. She sought out answers in the occult.
Right. She leaned heavily into superstition. The historical records mention 2 specific encounters that basically poured gasoline on her paranoid delusions.
The fortune tellers.
Yeah. First, she goes to a local fortune teller who looks at her and says, point blank, that she would marry and have children, but all her children would die.
Just brutal.
Imagine sitting in a dimly lit room, having already buried several kids, and hearing that.
It's the ultimate confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Her deepest, darkest fear is being validated by an authority in the occult. The delusion hardens into indisputable fact.
And then she goes to a Romani palm reader. The woman traces the lines on Leonarda's hands and says, and this is a direct quote from the deep dive sources, "In your right hand, I see prison. In your left, a criminal asylum."
Which is incredibly chilling considering how her life ends.
Seriously, it's spooky how accurate that was.
But psychologically, these prophecies push her completely over the edge into what psychiatrists call magical thinking.
Explain magical thinking for us. What does that actually look like in a person's day-to-day life?
Well, it's a cognitive distortion. It's an illusory expansion of the ego, where an individual truly believes their internal thoughts, their specific rituals, or their words can physically influence the external world in supernatural ways.
Like stepping on a crack breaks your mother's back.
Exactly, but amplified to a psychotic degree. In Leonarda's mind, if supernatural forces were responsible for killing her 10 children, then only supernatural rituals could protect the remaining 4.
The 2018 psychiatric report also brings up this concept of personality splitting, that she basically fractured into 2 different people to cope with this.
Yes, the division between what the researchers call Nardina and Norina. Nardina was the loving, long-suffering mother, the victim of tragedy, the pillar of the community who baked sweets and offered advice.
And the other one?
Norina was the predatory, highly calculating persona, the one capable of extreme, cold-blooded violence.
So she was kind of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation.
Less of a chemical transformation and more of a psychological defense mechanism. This splitting allowed her to maintain narcissistic homeostasis.
What does that mean exactly?
Think of narcissistic homeostasis like a psychological thermostat for the ego. If your self-image gets too cold, meaning you feel worthless or evil, the thermostat kicks in to warm it back up with delusions of grandeur or justification.
Okay, I follow you.
Leonarda needed to view herself as the ultimate loving mother. By splitting off the violent acts to the Norina persona, she could commit unspeakable atrocities without shattering her self-image as the devoted mother, Nardina.
Because the violence was justified as necessary protection.
Exactly.
And amazingly, this fragile, terrifying psychological balance held together for years in Correggio. She and Raffaella moved there after the earthquake destroyed their home. She reinvented herself.
She did. She was resilient that way.
She opened her little shop selling clothes and furniture. She offered fortune-telling services. She became popular. People trusted her.
She integrated perfectly into the community.
But then we hit 1939. World War II is looming over Europe. Italy is mobilizing. And her eldest favorite son, Giuseppe, who was safely studying at the University of Milan, gets drafted into the Royal Italian Army.
For Leonarda, the geopolitical realities of World War II were totally irrelevant. In her mind, this was the mother's curse finally coming for her most prized possession.
Right, it wasn't about politics, it was about magic.
The government was going to take her favorite boy and feed him into the artillery fire of a global conflict. The sheer blinding panic she must have felt would have been absolute.
I can't even imagine.
Her delusion crystallized in that exact moment. She decided that the only way to bribe fate, the only way to satisfy the curse and ensure Giuseppe's survival on the front lines was to offer the universe a blood currency.
Human sacrifice. She genuinely believed that if she murdered other people, their deaths would act as a supernatural shield for her son.
From the prison tattoo to the caustic pot, we talked about Weinstein's complicity machine and the Voorhees code. But Leonarda created a sacrifice machine in her own kitchen.
Wait, pause for a second. The Voorhees code. Break that down for a moment so we understand the comparison.
Right, of course. When criminologists look at organized, systemic crimes, they look at the frameworks that allow them to happen. The Voorhees code, the Russian mafia, use a strict code and a system of prison tattoos to organize their criminal enterprise.
Right, it's a whole culture.
Exactly. It's a deeply structured, logical system of power and finance. Harvey Weinstein used a complicity machine, a network of lawyers, NDAs, and corporate enablers to systematically facilitate his abuse.
Because those systems are driven by power, greed, and control.
Yes. Leonarda built a system too, but her sacrifice machine was driven entirely by warped folk magic maternalism.
That is such a vital distinction. When we think of serial killers, your Ted Bundys, your John Wayne Gacy's, we look for sexual sadism, or we look at hitmen motivated by financial greed. But Leonarda's motivation was just violently distorted protection.
Exactly. Unlike traditional serial killers, her murders were structured as a highly private domestic theater of ritual sacrifice.
What it is terrifying.
The psychiatric evaluations highlight a detail from her memoir, where she actually likened herself to the Greek goddess Thetis.
Oh, from mythology.
Yes. In mythology, Thetis dipped her infant son Achilles into the river Styx to burn away his mortality and protect him from death in battle.
Oh, wow.
Leonarda believed that the blood of her neighbors was her modern equivalent of the river Styx. She wasn't just killing them to get them out of the way, she was harvesting them.
Harvesting them. Just let that word hang there.
It's grim.
Having built this terrifying sacrifice machine in her mind, the machine needs raw materials. It needs bodies. And she was incredibly calculating about her target profile.
Very much so.
She didn't just grab a stranger off the street. She carefully surveyed her social circle in Correggio and identified 3 very specific women.
The victimology is where the insanity defense really struggles, because her selection process was coldly logical.
She knew exactly what she was doing.
Yes, she targeted solitary, middle-aged women. Women who had significant financial assets or property, but more importantly, women who were emotionally vulnerable.
Because they were women who wouldn't be immediately missed. I mean, if a young mother of 5 disappears in a small Italian town, the police are knocking on doors by sundown.
Exactly.
But if a lonely, unmarried woman in her 50s or 70s quietly leaves town for a supposed new life, it might be months before a distant relative even asks a question.
It was a calculated risk assessment. She used her position as a trusted community pillar, a fortune teller, and a matchmaker to lure them.
She knew their weak spots.
She knew exactly what these women desperately wanted to hear: promises of a wealthy husband, promises of a glamorous job away from the provincial boredom of Correggio, and she leveraged that hope like a weapon against them.
And her MO, her modus operandi, was chillingly consistent. She would pull them aside and tell them, "I've found your dream opportunity," but then came the trap.
The isolation.
Right. She insisted they had to keep it an absolute secret. She convinced them that if they breathed a word to anyone in town, it would cause intense jealousy, people would gossip, and the opportunity would be ruined.
Which achieves the total psychological and social isolation of the victim.
Yes. And the most manipulative part of the trap. She forced them to write post-dated postcards and letters to their friends and family.
That part is just so devious.
She told them, write these now so you can just drop them in the mail as soon as you arrive at your new destination. The letters assured everyone they were safe, happy, and settling in.
It provides the illusion of life continuing long after death. By having those letters pre-written, she bought herself a massive window of time to process the bodies and clean the crime scenes without arousing any suspicion from the post office or the families.
It's genius in the most evil way.
That level of premeditation is executive function at its peak.
Having built this perfect, airtight trap, she finally sets it for her first victim in late 1939. Her name was Faustina Setti. She was a 73-year-old spinster.
Faustina's story is particularly difficult to digest because of how deeply her vulnerability was exploited. She had lived her entire life alone, and her one remaining desire was just to find companionship.
To find a husband before she died.
Exactly.
Leonarda plays the role of the magical matchmaker perfectly. She tells Faustina, "I found him. I found a wealthy, respectable man living in Pola, which is in modern-day Croatia, who wants to marry an affectionate woman to spend the twilight of his life with."
A total fabrication.
Completely. But Faustina was so overjoyed, so utterly desperate for this fiction to be true, that she sold her house, sold her property, and actually dyed her gray hair blonde for the trip to meet her new husband.
She was preparing for a rebirth. She was literally shedding her old life.
But on the morning she's supposed to leave, she goes to Leonarda's house in the center of town to say a final goodbye and to drop off those pre-written postcards.
The final step of the trap.
Leonarda smiles, welcomes her in, and offers her a glass of wine to toast her new marriage. But the wine is heavily drugged.
Right.
Faustina drinks it, the room spins, she passes out in the chair, and then Leonarda kills her with an axe.
This raises an important question, especially when we consider the physical realities of the crime. Leonarda Cianciulli was 1.5 meters tall, that's barely 4 foot 11 inches, and she weighed around 50 kilograms, about 110 pounds.
Tiny.
How does a woman that small ensure a lethal strike? Why an axe?
I mean, if she tries to strangle someone, even a 73-year-old, they might wake up and fight back. She didn't have the upper body strength for a sustained physical struggle.
Precisely. The axe utilizes physics, gravity, and the momentum of the heavy metal head on a fulcrum. providing catastrophic blunt force trauma and laceration that her small muscles couldn't generate alone.
Which does the work for her.
The axe provided the necessary leverage to guarantee instant death. It was a purely pragmatic, mechanical choice of weapon.
And here's where it gets really interesting, or, well, deeply viscerally disturbing. Killing Faustina was only step one. A dead body doesn't appease a curse.
No, it has to be processed.
Right. To create her blood currency, she had to transmute the flesh. She dragged Faustina's body into a closet, stripped her, and using a handsaw and a butcher knife, dissected the 73-year-old woman into exactly 9 pieces.
We have to look at that number, 9. It appears repeatedly in her official confessions and the psychiatric reports.
Is it significant?
Very. In occult traditions, numerology, and folk magic, 9 is highly significant. It is a number of absolute completion. It's 3 times 3, the Holy Trinity multiplied.
Wow, okay.
This wasn't just a messy, panic dismemberment to scuff a body into a trunk so she can flee. It was a structured, ritualistic necrotomy designed to fulfill a magical quota.
And the ritual was just getting started. She takes those 9 pieces and she initiates a process of saponification.
This is the part that is just...
Yeah. Now, for you listening, if you are eating right now, I highly recommend you put your food down. Leonarda's official confession describes this process with a horrifying clinical detachment that makes my skin crawl.
It's industrial.
She took the 9 body parts and threw them into a massive copper cauldron on her kitchen stove. Then she added 7 kilos of caustic soda.
Caustic soda, otherwise known as lye or sodium hydroxide. It is a highly corrosive, extremely dangerous chemical base used in traditional soap making.
She had literally gone out and bought huge sacks of it specifically for this purpose.
Right.
So what happens chemically when you boil a human body in lye?
Saponification is a chemical reaction. When you heat animal fat, or in this case human adipose tissue, with a strong alkali like lye, it triggers alkaline hydrolysis.
Right.
The lye breaks the ester bonds in the fat molecules, releasing fatty acids which then bind with the sodium in the lye to create a crude soap and glycerol.
Good Lord.
It doesn't just boil the meat off the bone, it fundamentally alters the cellular structure, liquefying proteins and fats.
And she stirred this cauldron for hours. She stirred it until Faustina Seti dissolved entirely into what Leonarda Cianciulli described in her confession as a thick, dark mush.
As a thick, dark mush.
Yeah. She then poured that human mush into several buckets, walked outside, and dumped her neighbor into a nearby septic tank.
It is the ultimate profound degradation of a human being. From a psychological standpoint, this transmutation process stripped the victim of all humanity.
Just reduced her to sludge.
Yes. It reduced a woman who had hopes and dreams, a woman who dyed her hair blonde to meet a husband, into raw industrial slurry for Leonarda's sacrificial laboratory.
But the mush wasn't the point. The mush was just waste disposal. The actual sacrifice was the blood. While she was dissecting Faustina with the saw, she carefully drained the victim's blood into a separate basin. She let it coagulate.
The domestic horror of what comes next is truly staggering.
She takes this coagulated human blood, puts it in her oven, and bakes it until it dries out completely. Then she grinds it down into a fine, dark powder.
Just horrible.
She takes that blood powder, brings it to her kitchen counter, and mixes it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, eggs, and a bit of margarine. She kneads the dough. She bakes crunchy tea cakes. Wait, she actually set them that. She fed people blood pastries.
Yes, she did. She placed them on a nice serving plate and offered them to the ladies who came to visit her shop. And, crucially, she and her son Giuseppe ate them as well.
She fed her son human blood cookies to save him from the war. It's just, I can't even wrap my head around the delusion required to chew that and think, yes, this is maternal love.
This is where we see the archaic concept of ritualistic cannibalism merge completely with her maternal psychosis.
Right.
By consuming the cakes, and specifically by making Giuseppe eat them, she believed they were internalizing the blood currency. They were literally absorbing the life force of the sacrificed victim to fortify Giuseppe's supernatural armor against the bullets and bombs of World War II.
And the fact that she shared them with the neighborhood, she's serving these pastries to her friends, pouring them coffee, chatting about the weather while they eat Faustina.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the absolute perversion of Italian hospitality. In that culture, offering food to a guest in your home is a profound gesture of friendship, trust, and community.
It's the ultimate betrayal.
She weaponized that domesticity.
Yeah.
She hid absolute madness, the literal consumption of a neighbor, behind the most ordinary, welcoming household gesture imaginable.
And the most terrifying part, it worked. Nobody suspected a thing. Faustina was a lonely woman with no close family. People in Correggio just assumed she was happily married and living by the sea in Pola.
The perfect crime in her eyes.
Leonarda also pocketed 30,000 lire from Faustina's life savings. So the machine was fully operational. Giuseppe was safe. But the curse, apparently, was hungry. It demanded more, because less than a year later, on September 5, 1940, she strikes again.
The second victim, Francesca Soavi.
Francesca was a 55-year-old widow. She lived alone and was an unemployed kindergarten teacher looking for purpose. Leonarda, doing a palm reading for her, claims to have magically found her prestigious job at a girls' school in Piacenza.
Using her vulnerabilities again.
And the ritual repeats flawlessly. Francesca is told to keep it an absolute secret so no one steals the job. She writes the post-dated postcards. She comes over for a farewell drink. Drugged wine, axe, 9 pieces, caustic soda, blood in the tea cakes.
What is particularly interesting about Francesca's murder is the financial aspect. This time, the financial gain was much smaller, only about 3,000 lira.
Oh, compared to 30,000 from the first one.
Exactly. That detail actually strongly supports the psychiatric argument that financial greed was merely a secondary motive, a convenient bonus.
Like she wasn't just doing it for the money.
No. The primary engine driving these murders was the compulsion of the sacrificial ritual itself. If this was purely a robbery-homicide operation, a woman as calculating as Leonarda would have held out for a wealthier target.
And Giuseppe, the son she's trying to protect, actually travels to Piacenza just to drop Francesca's pre-written postcards in the mail. So the postmark matches the story. The town gets mail from Francesca saying she's doing great at the school, while in reality she's been poured into a cesspool. The machine is running smoothly. Leonarda is confident. Maybe she gets too confident. Because a few weeks later, on September 30, 1940, she selects her third and final victim, and this is where she fundamentally miscalculates.
The introduction of Virginia Cacioppo is the turning point that leads to the rapid unraveling of the entire operation.
Virginia was 53, and she was not a quiet spinster or an unemployed teacher used to fading into the background. She was a former operatic soprano.
A very public figure, relatively speaking.
Yes, the sources note she'd actually sung at La Scala in Milan, which is one of the most world-renowned opera houses on earth. She had fallen on harder times in Correggio and fiercely yearned for that glamorous city life again.
And Leonarda knew exactly how to play that.
Leonarda preys on this exact vanity and ambition. She promises Virginia a high-paying secretarial post for a mysterious, wealthy impresario in Florence. She even dangles the hint that there might be a singing engagement involved.
It's the perfect bait for a former star longing for a return to the spotlight. But Virginia's theatrical background is exactly why she was a terrible target for this specific MO.
Right.
A woman accustomed to the stage, to attention, to applause, is not going to just quietly pack a bag and disappear without telling anyone about her grand comeback.
Exactly. Virginia was bursting with excitement. She promised Leonarda she wouldn't tell a soul, but she immediately went out and confided in 3 separate friends. And crucially, she told her sister-in-law, Albertina Fanti.
The fatal flaw in the plan.
But Leonarda has no idea the secret is out. So Virginia comes over, gets the drugged wine, gets the axe. But this time, the disposal process changes slightly. Virginia's flesh, according to Leonarda's incredibly callous confession, was different from the others. It was fat and white.
The saponification of Virginia Cacioppo yielded a much thicker, higher-quality chemical reaction, which Leonarda horrifyingly adapted for her domestic production.
I'm going to read the direct quote from Leonarda's confession here because it's stomach-turning.
Brace yourself.
She said, "She ended up in the pot like the other 2. Her flesh was fat and white when it had melted. I added a bottle of cologne, and after a long time on the boil, I was able to make some most acceptable creamy soap. I gave bars to neighbors and acquaintances. The cakes, too, were better. That woman was really sweet."
It's a terrifying quote to analyze. It highlights a complete psychopathic absence of empathy.
She's talking about a person.
Yes, she is evaluating a human being entirely by their utility as a raw ingredient for cosmetics and pastries. That woman was really sweet. It's a culinary critique of a murder victim.
Oh, it's so gross.
The addition of the cologne to mask the odor of boiled flesh, the distribution of the creamy soap to the neighbors. She has fully integrated the butchery of humans into her daily domestic routine.
Just imagine washing your hands with soap your neighbor gave you, and the soap is the opera singer from down the street. It's revolting. But the slip-up had already happened. Virginia didn't arrive in Florence. Her sister-in-law, Albertina Fanti, wasn't receiving the reassuring post-dated postcards she expected.
And Albertina had a piece of information the police didn't have yet.
Yes, Albertina knew something crucial. She had physically watched Virginia walk up to Leonarda's door, enter the house on the day she disappeared, and she knew Virginia had never come back out.
That visual confirmation shatters the illusion Leonarda had worked so meticulously to maintain. Albertina doesn't wait around. She goes straight to the superintendent of police in Reggio Emilia and reports her suspicions.
The police launch an investigation. Commissary Serrao takes the case. And at first, the town thinks it's absurd. The police show up to the respected soapmaker's house, and the community is shocked. Like, Leonarda, the nice lady who bakes the cookies, you must be mistaken.
They couldn't believe it.
But the police get a warrant, they search the house, and the facade crumbles fast.
They find physical, undeniable forensic evidence. They find bloodstains deep in the floorboards that she hadn't managed to scrub perfectly clean. And most damningly, they find a collection of dentures belonging to the victims.
Even with the teeth sitting right there, Leonarda is defiant. She denies everything. She threatens to sue the police for slander. She's completely unrepentant, playing the outraged citizen.
She was a good actress.
But then, the investigators play their trump card. They look at this tiny 4'11" woman and they think, there is no physical way she overpowered 3 women, hacked them up, and disposed of them all by herself. So they arrest her beloved son, Giuseppe.
Charging him as an accomplice to murder.
Yes.
And that is the one pressure point that could break her.
Right. Her entire motivation, this whole horrific sacrifice machine, the boiling lie, the blood cakes, it was all built solely to protect Giuseppe from harm. The thought of him going to prison or facing a firing squad was absolutely intolerable to her.
Her worst nightmare.
So the second they cuff him, she drops the axe. She gives a full, highly detailed confession. She claims she did every single stroke of the axe, every stir of the pot, completely alone. She insists Giuseppe had no idea he was mailing postcards for dead women or eating human blood.
But this raises an important question for the magistrates, and it brings us right back to the hook of our deep dive. How? How did she physically do it?
Exactly.
The authorities were incredibly skeptical of her confession regarding the dismemberment. They couldn't reconcile the sheer physical labor and anatomical precision of butchering a human body with this frail-looking, middle-aged shopkeeper.
Which leads to the 12-minute necrotomy we talked about at the start. To prove her son's innocence, she essentially had to audition as a butcher for the police.
Exactly. She was escorted to the morgue in Reggio Emilia. They presented her with an unclaimed cadaver.
And with a gallery of officials watching, she takes the saw and the knives. She doesn't gag. She doesn't hesitate. She approaches the cold flesh and systematically breaks it down into 9 pieces in under 12 minutes. The authorities were stunned into silence.
It served 2 purposes for the investigation. First, it proved her physical capability beyond a shadow of a doubt. But more importantly, from a psychological perspective, it demonstrated a profound, terrifying detachment from the act of violence.
It's just business to her.
Exactly. You don't perform a rapid necrotomy in front of an audience of judges unless you view the human body as nothing more than raw material.
It solidified her image in the press. The newspapers dubbed her the mother-turned-butcher. Giuseppe is eventually cleared, though he did spend some stressful time in jail before being released for lack of evidence, and Leonarda finally faces trial in June 1946, just after the war ends.
The trial itself became a fascinating battleground of early 20th century psychiatric and criminological theory.
The prosecution's angle was very straightforward. She was just a ruthless grifter. They pointed to her 1927 fraud conviction. They tallied up the 83,000 lire, the bonds, the jewelry, and the clothes she systematically stole from the 3 victims.
Building a case for pure greed.
Right. They argued all the cursed stuff was nonsense, and she was a cold-blooded killer motivated purely by financial gain.
But the defense, and Leonarda herself, vehemently pushed back against that narrative. She stated on the stand, "I did not kill for hatred or greed, but only for the love of a mother." This brings us to the psychiatric evaluation, conducted by Professor Filippo Saporito, who was the director of the criminal asylum in Aversa.
What did he find? Because looking at her baking blood into cookies, it's hard to argue she's of sound mind.
Saporito observed her for months. He concluded she suffered from hysterical psychosis and argued for total mental infirmity. Now, we have to contextualize Italian psychiatry at the time. Saporito was heavily influenced by the theories of Cesare Lombroso, who was often called the father of modern criminology.
Lombroso, wait, wasn't he the guy who believed criminals were Basically evolutionary throwbacks. Like, you could tell if someone was a murderer just by measuring the shape of their skull or the slope of their forehead.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Lombroso's theory of biological atavism posited that criminal behavior was innate, a result of physical or mental degeneracies that harken back to primitive humans.
Oh, wow.
Sabrina was looking at Leonarda through this somewhat archaic lens, trying to classify her madness as an organic hysterical defect.
But modern criminologists, like the ones who wrote the 2018 paper, they look at the case files differently now, don't they?
They do. Modern researchers like Augusto Bologna and Roberta Bizzi have re-examined the transcripts and the evidence. They suggest she likely suffered from a severe combination of histrionic and narcissistic personality disorders, layered over deep paranoid schizophrenia.
That makes more sense to me.
However, they note that her ability to operate the sacrifice machine, her careful plotting, her manipulation of the victim's vanities, these require high-level executive function. A totally unmoored, wildly psychotic person cannot systematically orchestrate the bulk buying of lye, the forging of letters, and the complex chemical reduction of a body over several days.
The jury in 1946 actually kind of agreed with that modern middle ground. They didn't buy that she was totally blindly insane. They found her semi-mentally infirm, which essentially meant her mind was diseased, but she still possessed enough agency to know what she was doing.
And that specific finding had massive legal implications. Because they ruled she was in a state of semi-infirmity, they actually denied the charge of premeditation. Under the Italian legal framework at the time, true premeditation was deemed incompatible with a fragmented mental state.
Which is absolutely wild to me. She literally bought 7 kilos of caustic soda in advance and told women to write post-dated letters. If that isn't premeditation, what is?
It's definitely a contradiction.
But despite dodging that specific charge, she didn't walk free. On July 20th, 1946, she was sentenced to 30 years in prison, plus a mandatory 3 years in a criminal asylum. And during the trial, there was this bizarre, almost tragic-comic moment where she was on the stand, and she proudly bragged to the courtroom that she had donated her copper ladle, the exact ladle she used to skim the human fat off the boiling kettles to the Italian government for the war effort.
It highlights her complete, impenetrable detachment from reality. She genuinely expected to be praised by the judge for her patriotism, offering the physical instrument of her atrocities to help the state melt down metal for bullets.
She never saw freedom again. She eventually died of a cerebral hemorrhage apoplexy in 1970 at the age of 76 in a women's psychiatric hospital in Pozzuoli. No one came to claim her body, and she was buried quietly in a communal ossuary. It was a very bleak, quiet end to one of the loudest, darkest chapters in true crime history.
But her legacy, the physical reality of her crimes, is still tangible today. It isn't just a story.
Right, the museum. If you travel to the Criminological Museum in Rome today, you can actually see the real physical items from this case. They have the massive copper pot she used as a cauldron. They have the hammers, the handsaws, the meat cleavers, the axes.
She kept all of it.
They're sitting right there behind glass on display. It takes the story out of the realm of abstract folklore and drops it right into heavy, undeniable reality.
It serves as a grim testimonial. It's a physical reminder of a case where maternal devotion was distorted into a monstrous, localized apocalypse.
So what does this all mean for you? Why are we dragging you through the caustic pot, the blood pastries, and the morgue demonstrations?
Because Leonarda Cianciulli fundamentally challenges our perception of the safe domestic space. She shows us how the overarching macro stresses of society, like the panic of an impending world war, when combined with deeply ingrained archaic superstitions and unhealed personal trauma, can completely fracture the human mind.
It's terrifying to think about.
She allows us to see how someone can commit the most unspeakable atrocities, the literal desecration of their neighbors, while genuinely truly believing they are acting out of pure love.
It's the ultimate horrific paradox. She baked cookies to save her son.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own. During her time in prison, Leonarda supposedly wrote a 700-page memoir called Confessions of an Embittered Soul. It's where we get all these vivid details about the mother's curse, the prophecies, the glass eating, and the mythological identification with the goddess Thetis. It paints her as a tragic, deeply insane victim of a cruel universe.
But we have to look at the source critically. Exactly. Leonarda only had a third-grade education. Many modern scholars and legal experts look at that massive, rhetorically complex 700-page document, and they harbor serious doubts. They believe it was boast-written or heavily edited and embellished by her defense attorneys to bolster her insanity plea and save her from the harshest penalties.
which reframes the entire narrative we've just discussed.
If she didn't write it, if the supernatural delusions, the prophecies, the mother's curse were all exaggerated or completely fabricated for the court, does that mean she wasn't under a spell at all? Does it mean the warm, friendly neighbor who poured your coffee and baked those sweet, crunchy tea cakes knew exactly how evil she was all along? Think about that the next time you step into a warm, inviting kitchen. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you.